Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a great day. This, to the best of my knowledge, is the first time I've recorded one of these from a hotel room. So, to all of my students, I apologize for any unnecessary noise that's going to come through. I will do my best to get through this quickly. And if that intro weren't enough, this is a quick reminder that I am not a professional YouTuber. All images and quoted text are used for educational purposes. I'm not trying to monetize this video. I'm trying to get information to my students because in this case, I'm the one who is absent from class for personal reasons. I want to start the introduction of the cold dish by talking about something that I believe very strongly, that reading prose fiction is important to thinking. It's not something isolated, it is an important element of thinking. This class is supposed to be about critical reading, critical writing. Prose fiction is about thinking. You build up from 26 letters and a handful of punctuation marks. Use your imagination. You create a world, you people it, and you look out through other eyes. You have to think in order to see the world through other eyes. And I want to emphasize that by talking about three characters and how they are portrayed in the movie or the television series Longmire, excuse me, and how the book describes them. Here you see the actor who plays Longmire, and let's just talk very quickly about Walt from the book. We know that he graduated USC in 1966. That makes him about 22 years old. The Cold Dish was published in 2004, which would put Walt right around the age of 60. Robert Taylor is an Australian actor. We can argue about the wisdom of having an Australian play a Wyoming cop, but for the purposes of our thing, let's just talk about age. He was born in 1963. The first Longmire episode aired in 2012. That put the actor at 49. Maybe 11 years isn't that big of a deal, and maybe this will all fit through the magic of television. But nonetheless, a casting director made a choice that doesn't quite fit the description we have in the book, doesn't let us people it through our own imagination. Let's take a look at Henry. The actor Lou Diamond Phillips plays Henry, and the thing that struck me from reading the books and then watching the television series is that Henry had played interior line from Pee Wee through high school. That marks him as a big kid and a big adult. Here, now we're going to assume that he's Walt's age, that puts him at a 60-year-old. He's putting all 220 pounds into the tire iron. Lou Diamond Phillips doesn't necessarily look 60. Age is probably deceptive, but I'm pretty sure that if he's weighing in at 180, that's probably tops. He's not putting 220 pounds into the tire iron. Once again, somebody else is making the decision for us about what the character looks like, and it certainly doesn't match my imagination. The most egregious, it seems to me, is Vic. Katie Sackhoff, who plays the character Vic, is a talented actress. I think she did a great job in the role. However, if you look at her blonde-haired, pale-skinned, it doesn't match the description of olive complexion, short black hair that kind of stood up in pure indignity, in other words, kind of wild and tousled, and her eyes were the color of tarnished gold. Not sure that any of that matches Katie. And so I think it's important. Prose forces you to use your imagination. And let me be clear, the same argument could be made about Layla Starr. I love comics, but the fact of the matter is, we were dependent on the art to get us half of the story. And so comics and film do the same thing. They move us beyond the imagination that prose fiction allows us to have. The next thing that I want to do is take a look, because I think the first line here is important. Reality and imagination are completely intermixed in our brain, which means that the separation between our inner world and the outside world is not as clear. We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. You can argue that I am seeing all of the actors as I am and being picky because of the book. At the same time, the important thing here is that the reality and the imagination are mixed. That separation is not very clear. Which brings us back to thinking. Thinking is about the assessment. So what is the fiction telling us? What are the words on the page telling us? As we weigh the available evidence, can we grasp what is? All of this, I think, is important to critical thinking. All of this is important to the process of writing and the process of reading. So whether you're reading nonfiction or whether you're reading prose fiction, the link between reading and thinking and between writing and thinking, I think is really important. And I want to stress that fiction allows us to think because, again, to go back to the previous slide, that line between reality and imagination is not as clear as a lot of people would want us to believe. Let's move on to some connections to Mount Marty. As we're beginning this book and we're looking at some of the elements of the novel, we talk about Henry owning the bar. It's another beautiful day at the Red Pony Bar and continual soiree. And Walt talks about Henry owning the bar to have a sense of community, a way of looking after things to make sure everything is all right. And if you take a look at the Benedictine hallmark, community, the call to serve the common good, make sure everything is all right, look after things. It's one of the things that Henry does. It's one of the things that Walt wants to do as the sheriff. It's one of the things that Mount Marty calls us to do. So I think it's important to continue to make these connections even after the connection paper is over and we've moved on. Another quick connection, Benedictine hallmark number 1, which isn't going to quite come through on the screen, the idea of love of neighbor, love of self, or love of neighbor, love of others. The idea that we have to see things and we have to see people as people. Several of you talked about using a David Brooks essay from the Benedictine leadership in your connection paper. Brooks's latest book is about how to see others. And I think it's important. South Dakota, for example, has 3 of the poorest counties in the country. The death rate on the reservations in South Dakota, I'm sure that the average Native American in South Dakota probably dies more than 11 years before the average white person in South Dakota. It's important that we don't see people as numbers, that we see people as people. And then I want to make some obscure connections. And one of those obscure connections is this concept of terroir, the particular environment in which grapes for a wine were grown, which give wine the special character. But I think in a lot of ways, the novel gets us to the point of Durant, Wyoming, and the mountains and all of that created Walt as a character, created Walt as a person. It created Henry Standing Bear as a person. So to imbue somebody, to fill someone with a particular feeling, a quality, or an idea, terroir seems to do that. And so does the natural environment of Wyoming imbue the cold dish? that's something to be reading and thinking about. I certainly believe it does. But as you're reading, I think that the particular environment that the characters are created in, not just grapes for wine, but the environment that the characters were created in, is central to this novel. Other connections. Walt gets a little sarcastic about his Methodist background. He'd been raised a Methodist. The highest sacrament was the bake sale. Allegedly, Garrison Keillor made these following comments about uh, Methodists, probably in his Lake Wobegon uh, monologues, but I could not find it in the Lake Wobegon thing. I'm just going to trust that somebody said a few of these things. Methodists drink coffee as if it were the third sacrament. I know Catholics have a lot more, but Protestants tend to limit the sacraments down to the idea of baptism and communion. Drinking coffee is the third for the Methodists. They serve jello in the proper liturgical color of the season and think that peas and tuna casserole adds too much color. Those of you who grew up in small towns, almost every church has a special casserole for potlucks and a special casserole for funerals. Tuna casserole here. Apparently, the peas are too much of a problem. Again, let's make fun of the Methodists for a little bit. And you know you're a Methodist when it's 100 degrees with 90% humidity and you still have coffee after the service. Actually, I think that sounds like just people from Minnesota and the Dakotas, not just Methodists. Donuts are a line item in the church, just like coffee. God bless the Methodists if that's true. And when you watch a Star Wars movie and they say, "May the Force be with you," you respond, "and also with you." And lest one think that I want to make fun of Methodists, and I'm not one, I'll just make fun of the background I was raised in. One of the jokes that we made, before going to church and Baptist Sunday school about why don't Baptists have sex standing up, people might think they're dancing. Dancing was a terrible sin when I was a little lad. And then moving on to a transition into something a little more serious, and I hope there's a connection. Stereotype. A stereotype is this image of characters that a lot of people believe represents a particular type of person or thing. The verb, if a person is stereotyped, people form a fixed idea about them. So it's assumed that a person will behave a certain way if they are tall or short or fat or whatever. And what I think it's important to understand is that stereotyping is not something that should be done. What I want to talk about is the idea of an archetype. It's a symbol, it's a pattern, it's a character type in a story. Earlier in class, when we first started talking about detective novels and the Western, I said that the hard boiled detective and the cowboy were kind of linked. And I'm going to use Walt in this case as a cowboy. And I want to talk about the link between the cowboy and the knight and how they have a similar archetypal function. In the Old West, the cowboys would often travel from place to place in search of work. The knight would often travel from place to place as part of a quest. If the cowboy is employed, he works for a rich landlord. The knight, if he's employed, works for a rich lord. Cowboys are skilled with the rope. In the Western movies, they're skilled with their gun. The knight was skilled with all sorts of tools and weapons. Couldn't be a cowboy if you didn't have a horse. Knights were riding horses, jousting, all that sort of stuff. The cowboy, and as I said earlier, the hard-boiled detective, act on a personal code of behavior. The knights would act on a code of behavior, the code of chivalry. Cowboys, especially in the movies, fight alone for the good of those who can't. And again, the knight also fights for the good of those who can't. Cowboys are generally stoic. Knights were generally stoic. The cowboys rarely get the girl. And the knights rarely are with the maiden whom they worship from afar. They're happy if she drops a handkerchief and they get to pick it up. One of the things I think you need to look at is how much of Walt and how much of the people around him fit this kind of cowboy slash knight archetype. In the email I sent out, I said there'd be an assignment here in the video. So here's the assignment. In the comments, name your favorite character from the reading we have done so far this semester and give a one reason or give a reason. Sorry about the typo there. Give one reason. If your YouTube username isn't a name you use in class, be sure to let me know who you are. The comment is due by April 2nd, 2024. Jeanette Walls was the author of Hang the Moon. A quick picture of Layla Starr and the cast of Longmire, who, the TV series was based on The Cold Dish and the series that followed it. A couple of quick things after the assignment, and then I'll just wrap it up here. Connection to previous reading, I think it's important to look at what ways are Walt and Maddie similar? Would Maddie fit that cowboy knight thing? She drove the car rather than rode the horse. Walt does the same thing. She has her own code. She's in some ways becomes the Lord, but for a long time she was working for the Duke. And take a look at the supporting character as well as you're reading. Are any of the supporting characters fulfilling the same role? And then I think there's questions that are posed by all three, Layla Starr, The Cold Dish, and Hang the Moon. Questions about community, the creating of community, everyone having a responsibility to the community and to look after things to make sure everything's all right. I think there's a question about the natural and social environment of where people grow up. How much does that affect who they are? How can we make sure to see people as important? I think that was a big part of the Layla Starr thing. And do we ourselves do everything we can to see others as people? Or do we limit ourselves only to those close to us? And just the idea of the need for others. I think that was part of Layla Starr. I think that was part of Hang the Moon. And as you're reading, I think that'll be part of The Cold Dish as well. I'm going to have this posted, well before Easter. I hope everyone has a happy Easter break. Hope to see you all in class when we get back. Thank you very much.